Given the go. Let's do this. So we're super excited to be with you today, and thank you so much for joining us. We know that it's a really crazy world for you all out there at the moment, and what we're hearing from a lot of our clients is just continuous challenges around all of the things that we're going to talk about today: recruitment, retention, and engagement. And I think the challenge is that we've never gone through anything like this before. And we were at our event yesterday, and literally what we were hearing is that there isn't a playbook, there isn't a rule, there isn't a Google that you can do to work out kind of what we've had to go through in the last 18 months. So I think we're all in this precarious situation of reacting to what's happening in the world, and things keep getting thrown at us. So today we want to kind of put smiles on your faces a little bit as well. And we've got some great speakers with some amazing experience working in your space. And some of you might have come across Neil before, and Steve as well, our CEO, has got a lot of experience working in healthcare. So like I said, the intention today is just to give you a few nuggets, some takeaways that you can take back to your work environments and hopefully implement to kind of affect some of the biggest challenges that you're facing at the moment. So a few quick introductions to start with. So I'm Dawn. I'm from WorkBuzz, and I'm your hostess with the mostess today. I love talking, so it's actually one of my favourite things to do. So it's quite a good job for me, really. But at WorkBuzz, I've had the joy of working with companies like the Priory Group and Aspris, and I've had the privilege of speaking to workers at all levels of the organisation, from the front line all the way up to the exec, and have found it some of the most inspiring work that I've done in my career recently, really, just in terms of being able to make a difference. So I come at this from a place of passion. I'm really super passionate about the employee experience and improving culture. But really today it's about Neil and Steve. So Neil is the founder and CEO of Care Friends. I first heard about Neil through Steve, actually, when he told me about a book that Neil had written on saving social care. So a lofty goal, and definitely an industry that's in transition at the moment. I asked Neil for a fun fact about him, just to make you smile at the beginning of this webinar. We'll make sure that the Q&A at the end is not all about this, but apparently Neil got fired from as a bingo caller in Missouri in the 1990s because no one could understand his accent. Now, you haven't heard him speak yet, so I'll let you be the judge of that. But if you're not from Huddersfield, then you might struggle with my accent. So good luck anyway. And then we've got Steve, who is the founder and CEO of WorkBuzz, so the company that I work for. Steve couldn't come up with a very good fun fact, to be honest. So we need him to step up and think of something really fun.
This is why I think, Dawn, it's really hard to follow that from Neil. And I was tempted to make something. I think the fun facts I can share are slightly less fun. For 2 years, I was almost the ideal employee in care. My first job when I was 16 was working at a hospital called St Andrew's Hospital in Northampton. And every Saturday and Sunday when I was doing my A-levels, I worked there. I stayed for 2 years, which makes me almost one of the ideal care employees, as he's not leaving in the first 90 days, and that goes back a few years. And I think I was so impressed with Neil's photo, I decided to also try to grow a beard. And this is my attempt at a beard like Neil's. But I've known Neil for quite a few years. He's an amazing speaker, huge amounts of insight. So really delighted Neil could join us on today's webinar.
Just a few housekeeping bits from me just before we let them crack on with the content. The webinar is being recorded, so a copy will be emailed to you afterwards. So if you miss anything or you want to listen back or share with colleagues, then that's perfectly fine. We're going to save the Q&A to the end. So if you've got a question, feel free to use the chat function through it, and then myself and Rebecca towards the end will go through those questions. And if we don't get time to get to them all, then we'll follow up with a document on an email follow-up with, and we'll make sure that Neil and Steve populate your questions with answers, so you get them at some point after this as well. And there will be polls, so please get involved. Now, we want the technology to work, but we're fingers crossed everything's working so far. So please get involved. We're going to be sharing some research with you, but we'd also love to get your perspectives. just a little bit about WorkBuzz. So WorkBuzz, like I said, we're super passionate about helping you organizations improve the employee experience and their culture. And we help you gather real-time feedback from your people to ultimately improve employee engagement and retain talent. So we have lots of clients in the health and social care sector, and we love working and making a difference. And it's been especially humbling during COVID, actually, just to be part of that journey and to help through the employee listening that we've done as well. Steve has got a lot of experience working with Home Instead as well. Steve, do you want to just talk a little bit about what we've done there?
That's right. Yeah, thank you, Dawn. It's almost a decade since I started WorkBuzz and sort of spare bedroom, and sort of and we've grown a huge amount since. Worked with so many amazing people as well as great brands. But again, what I'm really passionate about, I think Dawn is as well, we share, is about making a difference. And I think there's never been, I think, a more challenging time in health and social care to make that difference. Those challenges around recruitment retention have always been there, but they're getting even harder. So we have worked with organisations like Home Instead, just as an example, for about 8 or 9 years since we very started, helping them to listen to their caregivers and their office staff, and then really build great cultures and use that data to know where to focus on. And what we're really pleased of, again, is that difference. So over an 8-year-long period working with Home Instead, we've helped them to improve their levels of engagement of their caregivers. And that's correlated with improving their customer satisfaction levels by 15% over the last 18 years and winning a record number of CQC outstanding ratings. So a few bits we'll share on today's webinar is research driven from WorkBuzz, but also learning from some of the great clients, not just Home Instead, but some of those logos on this slide too. So we'll bring that to the mix as well.
Neil, just a little bit about you and Care Friends.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn, and hi everyone. And I'm really pleased to be here. I've followed WorkBuzz as it's grown through the years, and always bump into Steve at different things. So I'm really pleased to be along today, and welcome to everybody. So yeah, just a very brief note about Care Friends. It's an app which I came up with the idea of about 3 years ago, and it's built on years and years of research, which you'll know yourself, is that employee referrals are simply the best source of staff in terms of performance and tenure. And of course, we're talking about retention and engagement today, and employee referrals make a big contribution to that. So the idea of the app is that it maximizes that pool of high potential staff. And I think in the current situation, recruitment wise, where it's really hard to find people at all, then you're all sitting on a huge pool of kind of invisible connections through your workforce into the local community. And that's really what Care Friends is attempting to mine for you. And you can just see on the graph there, we're growing pretty quickly. It's quite head spinning. I liken it to being tied to a really cross show pony as it tries to jump fences, and that's what it feels like at the moment.
Thanks, Neil. So today we're going to be sharing some really recent research. We actually launched it yesterday at an event in London at WorkBuzz Live, and it was a survey that was conducted in the summer, and over 300 organisations participated, including many from the care sector, and others with frontline staff as well. And it really focused on what organisations' biggest people challenges are right now. What are their priorities, and kind of what are the best practices that we're seeing out there. So what Steve's going to bring to life today is that sliced by the health and social care data that we've been able to capture as well. So enough from me. This is our agenda. So really we're going to start with that research. What are HR's biggest priorities right now? Becoming an employer of choice, top tips for improving retention, and then creating a world-class employee experience. And like we said, keep the chat coming. We'll look at the questions at the end, but I'm going to hand over to Steve now to take us through the slides.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dawn and Neil, for joining us. I'm super excited about this, really, just because the challenges ahead, I think, have ever been bigger. We've always had a big focus on recruitment and retention in the health and care sector. But I think those challenges are getting even bigger based on what's happened over the last 12 to 18 months. And we got some really unique research, and you are some of the first people in the world to hear about this. We, as Dawn said, we had an event in London yesterday called WorkBuzz Live. We had about 80 or so WorkBuzz clients there sharing this research and got really good feedback. What we're going to try to do now is really tailor that for your sector and make it much more meaningful. So we're not going to talk about challenges like hybrid working so much, but we're going to really focus on the bigger challenges, but also some takeaways that you can think about to sort of move the needle on recruitment section in the short term, but also create a great culture, create an amazing employee experience, so you become a magnet for talent and solve those challenges in the medium term as well, rather than just with sort of sticky plasters in the short term. And the report I'm going to hold up at the moment, literally just got copies printed. It's hot off the press. I can still feel it, sort of warm as I pick it up. Will be available from our website on Monday. And we'll make sure we send the webinar slide, recording that afterwards. We'll include a link to where you can pre-register for that download. But if we start with what are HR's biggest priorities going forwards, and the biggest things that are going to come through here really clear. First of all, improve employee engagement, that employee experience. What we mean by that, the employee experience is really everything that your employees touch, from the recruitment process through to onboarding, all the way through to leaving your organization around that. So that's one of the biggest challenges going forwards. We've then seen a big spike in organizations talking about employee well-being, that being a key priority. We normally run our research every 2 years. And what that allows us to do is see how things are trending. It's not shown on this slide, we kept it a little bit simple, but we've never seen employee well-being be ranked as the second biggest priority for organizations. And we know from our own clients in healthcare and social care, the pressures that the pandemic's put on employees, and having to work through some concerns a while back around PPE, their own health, their own protection, exhaustion, so much going on. So we're finding more and more organizations having to really prioritize well-being in different ways. Otherwise, it has that knock-on impact in terms of retention and also becoming an employer of choice and winning the war for talent. Thirdly, around creating diverse and inclusive workplaces. It goes hand in hand, actually, with providing a great employee experience. But in care, when we've looked at this data from the care sector, we found retention, number 4, even more important, just because of that sort of pressures on recruitment. There's no point in having a leaky bucket and bringing lots of talent in if you're losing them, particularly during the first few months. So there's some of the key themes that's come out from the research as a whole across 300 organizations, but in the care sector, there's a slight bigger focus on retention and recruiting great talent as well. So if we move on to the next slide, we want this to make it a little bit interactive, so I'll hand over to Dawn. So I was going to hand over to Dawn, and okay, we've got a poll about to be launched.
Sorry, I just had to run around and issue the poll. So we've got a quick poll. As we said, we want to know what your top HR priorities are right now. So if you can just select the one or that's kind of most relevant to you, and then we'll be able to see it on our screen.
So this is going to give us some cutting edge, literally leading data, sort of, and you'll see it for everyone else. And we'll just see how your top challenges compared, or top priorities compared to that sort of wider research that we've done in the HR community. And just to make it interesting whilst you're sort of selecting your option, I've made a bet with Neil. Neil, I think, is the most respected source on sort of social care in terms of recruitment retention. And I've made a secret bet with Neil in terms of what percentage each of these are going to come out of. And if Neil gets plus or minus 1%, next time we bump into the first drink is on me. Otherwise, it'll be on Neil. So a lot is at stake.
So Rebecca's, I think, just about to share those results with us now. Just bear with us while we're working with the technology. Yeah.
And I think Neil has won the bet. I think that's very close to Neil's guess, which shows you how his domain experience in this.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
And I feel quite lucky in terms of we expected recruitment retention to come out. So that's why we're going to deep dive on those going forwards, and we'll try to share some strategies. In terms of those challenges, we asked HR leaders, if they're your priorities, what are the key things you're being measured on going forwards? And no surprise, lots of organizations being measured on turnover, employee retention, absence around that, time to hire as well. So some of the key things to come through. And again, it's just trying to sort of think about your own KPIs, your business, which of these are you currently measuring, any that you can take you can take away. But I think again, based on that poll, recruitment retention coming out so strongly, I'm expecting sort of some of these to sort of feature in your own KPIs. I think linking to what Neil said earlier on, we know from our own surveys run for our clients at WorkBuzz that employees that are recruited from a referral tend to be more engaged and tend to have a higher intent to stay. I think Neil's data sort of reinforces that too. So again, one best practice I've seen is organizations even begin to set targets around what percentage of our new employees come from referrals. And that's a good indicator of the health of your employer brand as well, and effective tools like Neil's. We move on. So I think now we're going to move on to Neil in terms of becoming an employer of choice linked to that recruitment challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I think we have to look in the situation we're in, and particularly with both recruitment and retention under pressure, and they're two very closely bound together factors. Of course, if you can't recruit fast enough, then you will put pressure on your workforce, and then they will, as we are seeing, some of your best, longer serving staff might well be leaving now. And this is, the two things are very, very bound up together. And so it can be very important to feel like, okay, well, we need to improve our recruitment, but we also need to improve our retention. And one of the factors we know in social care is that we can't use pay as one of our superpowers. And even if we did get an awful lot more money coming from government, and the mood music suggests we won't, we know that pay is not the only reason why people stay. Amazon are paying £1,000 welcome bonuses now, and up to £20 an hour to spend your time with cardboard boxes. And I think we can win in our recruitment sort of attraction strategies by finding people that don't want to spend their time with cardboard boxes. They want to spend their time with people. So if we can find the right people in the community, and referrals are one way of doing that, then we can bring people in. But then what you do have control over is how much people want to stay with you, what their relationship and loyalty is and engagement is with you as an employer. And we know, since we can't use pay, we have to pull other levers. We have to start doing more than we are as an employer to become somewhere, so to create an employer brand and to become somewhere that people want to come and stay. And then it builds word of mouth in the local community, and you get a virtuous circle. So if we could just pop to the next slide, please. I want to give you a few tips, very practical tips on what you can do right now, because I know many of you might find your managers are actually having to be on the floor or out running calls. If you're in home care, you might well have to be, you're losing that kind of management function a bit because of the stresses that retention's under. But it's so important to be a visible leader. And that, I would say, is directed to both, say, the registered manager and the leadership team. And if you are an owner of a business, it's be as visible as you can. And that gives people confidence and they know that they're being valued. So visibility is very important. Secondly, two-way communication. Now, we know that one of the reasons, and we'll talk about retention in a little bit, the reason that people leave in the first 90 days and often in the first few days of employment is because they feel lonely, isolated and unsupported. And we need to give care staff a voice, particularly if they are community-based. We know that your care staff know much more about their clients and residents than the senior management do. Often decisions are made far away from the front line, and actually there's so much that the care staff do know about. And if you go to Germany, German care market, then there's often councils or or groups where there's has to be by law an employee voice. There has to be someone from the front line. I think it's a really important lesson. We need to open up communication channels. Now, what's happened during COVID is often those channels have opened up, and there is much more communication, and we're hearing that that has been a side effect or a benefit, if you like, of having to deal with a crisis. I think keep those channels open. You may find WhatsApp groups work really well. Some have, Facebook groups, but also polling and asking specific questions of your staff, getting their opinion is so important. And I think that's obviously something that WorkBuzz are very, very good at. And I think a final tip before we move on would be coming back to the leadership and how leadership drives culture and drives you becoming an employer that people want to work for and want to stay with, is personalize things. So writing a personal note home from the boss to all the staff, ideally when they've done something particularly good. And we know a top tip from America, which works very well here, I found in America, is mandating your supervisors to be looking all the time, every day. They have to find one good thing that someone is doing and make a record of it and pass that to the boss. And then you don't have to write every day at all, but every so often, just write a note home saying, I heard you did this thing. Thank you so much. And that will be shown to the family and they'll be very proud of that, and they'll keep it for months. And that sort of thing is the way, without money and all of the other things that we can't compete on. That is the way we will keep people by building that loyalty and that level of engagement and the feeling of being valued.
And we really see that come through on the employee surveys that we run as well. That sense of feeling valued and appreciated is massive. And even in the comments that we get back on surveys, when we ask people what makes them feel the most appreciated, it's often not a thing. It's just someone noticing what they've done and taking the time to say thank you. So I think, we've got the evidence really to back up that third point, to say that actually the things that you can do to actually create those moments that matter is really vital. Okay, let's move on. Steve?
It's just a top tip from one of our clients and taken from sort of social media. So we're lucky, and I feel really privileged to work with some amazing brands. One of those, Right at Home, and a long-term WorkBuzz client support of ours, and run a fantastic business from fantastic franchise owners locally too. And we run what's called the Right Care Survey. And a lot of it I would expect would run some kind of employee survey, sometimes annually, sometimes more frequent than that. We find a transition to more regular listing. But what you can do, and the best practice here from Right at Home, is if you had really positive feedback from your employee survey, create things like infographics here that they include in the social media. We also do this at a local franchise office level too, just to make it really relevant. Almost create a megaphone and amplify that positive feedback through social media. Display it in your offices, make your care staff feel like they're part of something special, and sort of leverage that data. So just one best practice around that. It may be you can also celebrate things like positive customer feedback on some of the various websites. But again, just leverage that feedback, amplify it, and build your employer brand so you win that war for talent.
Now we're going to move on to employee retention. So Neil.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, these topics are so closely bound up, and I think we need to, in an environment where it's really hard to recruit, it's so important not to have to unnecessarily recruit to replace people that you could have kept. And we know there are incredible pressures on the staff at the moment and on managers. So I thought it'd be helpful to look at some simple tips that you can launch kind of as soon as this webinar's over. And the way I like to unpack retention, because it can seem like a multi-headed hydra and incredibly confusing to know where to start. But I like to look at it in terms of 3 phases or stages of retention. And they are through the life cycle of an employee. So the first one is looking at the period that's never appears in any statistics. And this is the period from job offer acceptance through to their start date. Now we know, coming back to the Amazon or the Tesco's or any other substitute employers or hospitality sector that are chasing our staff, they can onboard somebody in the time it takes us just to get the DBS organised. So we have a disadvantage here in that it takes more time for us to get someone through the process of job offer acceptance, through DBS checks and through reference checking and getting them to day one. What can we do to keep them engaged during that period? I think one of the first things to do is to send a welcome note from everybody in the office. And this is incredibly popular and very simple to do. What you're doing is something really rather clever. What you're doing is sending a message to them that you are an employer of choice, that you value them, that you're looking forward to them joining, and also creates an emotional contract that there's an expectation that they will turn up because you're all waiting for them. So very simply, get a stack of 10 cards, get them signed by everybody in the office and keep the pen. And as soon as someone accepts the job offer, send them a card. And you can lose, or we are seeing a loss of up to 40% of people who accept a job offer and never start. And we know there are a lot of counter offers happening at the moment because employers are panicking about keeping staff. So this is a dangerous time for us when we can't physically have them in the office. They haven't actually started. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing we've learned is involve them in some way in either an employee referral scheme, so getting them to recommend their friends. We know they're very frequent referrers at this stage. They're excited about joining you. And if they recommend their friend to join, they're unlikely to drop out themselves because their friend is going to say on day one, where on earth are you? The other thing you can do is keep the communication going. And we know that people are sometimes persuaded after accepting a job offer by their family that they don't like the idea of them working in social care. So it's very important to provide reassurance and guidance that they can then manage the kind of any negativity from any other family member. For example, we often hear about their job in social care. So we've got a job to do here. So the recruitment is by no means over. So that's the first phase. The second phase, I think, is probably the most dangerous phase for all of us. And that is from day 1 through to day 90. So the first 3 months. And we know that staff turnover is the very, very highest here, particularly in the first few days and weeks of employment. So it's like jumping on a moving train for someone who particularly is joining the care sector. So what can we do about it? I think the first thing to say is coming back to the boss is a welcome from the boss is really, really powerful. It shows respect, shows that they are noticed, that they are matter, and that you're on on the boss's radar. So that's very important. But the single biggest intervention I think that you can put in place that we've seen from Skills for Care data is the most common thing that all of the employers with sub 10% staff turnover, which is an amazing figure in social care, is peer mentoring or buddying. And some of that automatically happens if you have an employee referral because they have a friend there already. But otherwise, we need to manufacture these friendships with other peer members. And this is a great way of getting longer standing members of staff involved to support people, particularly in a home care setting where they are often isolated, lonely, and feeling they lack support. And then the final stage I like to look at or consider is really from those 90 days onwards. And what happens is your staff turnover risk drops really quite dramatically. If you can get people past a year, it's very likely that they'll continue much longer. But we do need to work here at keeping people engaged, especially if someone's been with you for a couple of years and then they know that people joining are being paid exactly the same rate as them, although they're a loyal employee for 2 years. So if we can't use money, what can we do? And there are several things you can do. Ask them to be a peer mentor or a buddy is personal and professional development. You can get them to be involved in training, maybe part-time, or we know that they make excellent interviewers. Frontline care staff are statistically some of the best interviewers, even better than the HR team, actually, in terms of predicting outcomes and hiring the right people. So think of things you can give them. Many care staff want to stay on the front line. They don't want to be promoted away. Some do, but always find out from people, ask them about what their goals are. Some people, we know about 8% of staff in social care want to go on to be a nurse or have that ambition. So how can we support them on their journey? But finally, I would say the most important thing you can do is show regular appreciation, keep the communication lines open and show that they matter. And that is probably the single biggest thing we can do to improve this long-term retention.
I think just before I come on the slide, I think, Neil, you mentioned about sort of competing the talent from other sectors and the likes of Amazon being more aggressive and supermarkets and hospitality. I think really is an interesting takeaway from Amazon. So I think it's really easy to think about the headline about sign-on bonuses that some employees are paying like Amazon. But I think one of the things they've found most effective in the US is sponsoring all employees can take part on Amazon University or get college fees funded. I was reading about this recently in terms of when the design where that training is delivered, they're always in a glass room in the center of a fulfillment center. So people can look in and see their peers receiving that training, if it's been delivered in-house rather than, say, college. And I think they've made a huge investment in the US, particularly because of how powerful that is. And so that sense of a company's willing to invest in my long-term future is sometimes even more powerful than just the money. We see that all the time in the surveys that we run. So in here, this is just the examples of the fictional data. But if you run an employee engagement survey, a really powerful question to ask is really around employees' intent to stay. And do they see themselves work at your organization 12 months' time, even if they had another job offer elsewhere? And we know that it is a candidate market at the moment, so they have got options. And on the left-hand side, we've got a pit list of some different options that some of our clients may use there. But again, rarely does pay come through as the top answer. It could be in the top 3 or 4, but it's things that we can influence all of the time. In particular, what can come out really high for lots of our clients is perceptions they can't develop their career at their organization or advanced. And that's not always about long-term career. It's about the things that Neil spoke about. It's about that development. It's about the chance to train and mentor a new team member. It's about to be involved in recruitment and interview process and shortlisting. So it's just involving them outside of their day-to-day job around, giving them some sense of progression around that. So I think the softer stuff does make a huge difference. It's not just about the money. And if you run an employee engagement survey, I really encourage to focus on asking questions like this, really get under the skin of it, how to understand the reasons why your best carers may be looking to stay or leave, and also how that varies by their length of service, where your biggest turnover risks are. Can we move on to the next slide? I think that's a nice segue into creating a world-class employee experience. I think sometimes at WorkBuzz, we're in a sort of scale-up phase where we have doubled our headcounts in the last 6 months or so. We raised our first rounds of venture capital funding in March. It's a really exciting time. And recruitment retention is a challenge for us as well, where we're trying to recruit software engineers. We're trying to recruit great marketing talent. And I think it's really tempting sometimes to focus on the really short-term stuff. I need to fill that role in the next few months and operate really tactically. But in the long run, in order to be successful and really attract and retain the best talent, it's about creating a great culture and a world-class employee experience. To take away those pain points in the longer term. So for us, this is really, really important that we sort of practice what we preach. Dawn leads what we call a culture code around that, so we involve employees in shape it. So just wanted to share a few takeaways in terms of some of the longer term things you can think about to sort of help create a world-class employee experience and really become an employer of choice. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So for some context to begin with, we asked in the research on the model again, and you can get the report on Monday. We asked organisations over the last year, has employee engagements increased or declines over the last 12 months? And engagement for us is that emotional connection for working for your organisation, that willingness to go the extra mile, that feeling proud to work for your organisation, and then sort of intent to stay. So that's what engagement really means for us. And we have split roughly half, roughly the same number of organisations that engaged has improved compared to declines. But the really interesting stuff is when we looked at key workers, we looked at care staff and people who weren't able to work remotely during the pandemic. And it's a massive split. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide now, we look at frontline workers, employees in care. we found 24% more organisations had said engagement had declined over the last 12 months than improved. And if you put yourself in their shoes, concerns about PPE last year, feeling burnt out, with a pandemic having to cover for colleagues, a very different employee experience compared to if I've been able to work remotely from an office. So the huge amounts of pressure. And we found that with declining levels of employee engagement that lots of organisations in care and healthcare too.
And now it's your turn again, because we just love to know your experiences really. In your organisation, how has employee engagement changed over the last 12 months? So if you just want to spend a minute just selecting the option, and then we'll share the results with you in a second.
Like this poll, I have no bets with Neil on this poll. He did nail on the recruitment percentage pretty much to the exact number.
I feel like Zoom needs a da 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 da. Ooh. So there you go. I just did it anyway.
Okay, just give it a few more seconds.
Still coming in. See if it matches the research. Okay. Going to share.
Okay, interesting spread, isn't it? From the research, it's slightly more saying it's improved than declines, and that may be because the fact you're on this webinar, you're all invested in terms of becoming employer of choice. Really, I hope you're doing some of the tactics Neil shared already, but slightly more improved than climate. Interestingly, I fair say unsure. We found that correlated a lot with organisations not listening to their people. Through a platform like WorkBuzz, not having hard data. So really, really interesting. One of the things we've seen COVID accelerate is a shift to more regular listening. So we found over the last couple of years, more organisations may have used an annual employee survey shift to more regular pulse surveys. And we've got even things like weekly surveys. And there's no one size fits all if your workforce is digitally connected. And we know some of our clients in health and social care they may have an app where they can reach employees really easily, but if you don't, the idea of a monthly, weekly survey could probably get more admin hassle, not enough time to digest feedback and act on it. So it's no one size fits all. But we are seeing that shift over time away from getting feedback for a survey annually to slightly more frequent around that. If we just skip, I haven't covered that one already.
Sorry, it's my driving.
You've gone backwards rather than forwards. And we found more regular listening does correlate with more likely to have improved engagements. Again, it's trying to think about what is your organisation ready for. Do you have a really easy way to reach your frontline workers through an app? Are your managers ready to get feedback, say, quarterly or every 6 months around that? And that can evolve over time, building up that readiness and that capability. But I think the really important thing is if you listen to your people, you're able to benchmark, you're able to see how things are trending over time. And also sort of track things like employee referrals in terms of are those employees more engaged? If you look at recruitment channels, what is working and are people coming from such channels more likely to stay? So I think if we move on, we've also found really high performing organizations supplement a company-wide employee survey with onboarding surveys. I think not surprising based on Neil's research around the amount of new starters that leave in the first 90 days. So if you're able to supplement an organization-wide survey with a survey just to focus on new starters so you can optimize experience, that can work really, really well.
So we've wrestled through a lot of content with you there, and I think my key takeaway is just listening to everything that Neil and Steve have said is that really a lot of this is around connection, it's around belonging, it's around some of those softer pieces that really matter. It's about weaving in kind of the opportunities to help people feel valued and appreciated for their contributions, and it's about listening, listening as a people leader, just in having day-to-day conversations, but also wider listening at an organizational level to be able to dig in to really understand kind of what's happening with people. So in terms of kind of the key summaries, for most care organizations, apart from you guys, employee engagement has declined a little bit, but that's the research that we've seen in the State of Employee Engagement study. Biggest challenges in the health and social care sector right now are around improving engagement, retention and well-being. And to create a world-class employee experience, it's really about moving to more regular employee listening and asking the right questions to understand what's going on. And I think, Neil, you gave us some really good points as well. If you want to just summarize these quickly, that would be amazing.
Yeah, just really briefly, I would say, it's about recruiting people that will be engaged, in care, that they have a calling for care, and then, then they'll have loyalty towards your organization with some of the techniques that we've talked about today. So in terms of recruiting, obviously recruiting for value, something that Skills for Care have lots and lots of information on. From my experience, if I boiled it down, finding people with family care experience, people who are connected through your organization, through employee referrals, or maturity, whether that means demographically by age, or whether it means that it's a younger person who has had to mature earlier by having a brother or sister with a disability, or having to have looked after a parent or a grandparent. These are the people that have highest potential. So always look for those markers. Anyone that has a connection already somehow with adult social care, far more likely to go ahead and apply to you, up to 25 times more likely to apply and carry and become a care worker with you. So in a market where there's very few very few candidates, we have to be smart about who we're looking for. So I think that's the first point to make. The second point we talked about is, your role as a leader, if you're a leader on this call, is very much both in terms of making a welcome, of thanking people. And even when people say they're going to leave, if you intervene and say, I'm so sorry to hear that, is there anything we can do? You can bring people back from the brink because you're the boss, because you're showing that you care. Very, very important part of being employer of choice. Thirdly, then, make sure your office team are bought in to the value and the commitment that their frontline care staff have. So if you're bringing people in from out of the sector, get them involved and immersed in what it means to be a care worker, so we don't have a disconnect between the office team and the frontline care staff, and therefore a risk of people feeling unsupported. Fourthly, then, it's about soft skills. This is a relationship-centric business, so think of supporting people with sort of physical training. We're all about the physical training, about moving and handling and first aid. That's all very important. But what about supporting your supervisors with active listening, blame-free language? Often the supervisors are promoted from being care workers and they have no support themselves. So think about what you can do to support the whole relationship side. And finally, I think you need to bake in regular appreciation. So appreciation, two-way communication, both verbal and written, as much of that as you can do. It feeds the soul of our care workforce.
Amazing. Thank you both. I think what we failed miserably at is leaving enough time for the Q&A at the end. So that's our bag and our learning from this. We had questions come through on the chat. If anyone has any questions that they want to post in there now for Neil or Steve, please feel free to do so. And as promised, we will follow up with a document afterwards. I'll also, in the follow-up email that comes with the recording, we'll give contact details for Steve and Neil. So if you've got any questions and want to contact them directly to get additional research or just some more insights, then we're more than happy to share that as well. But a massive thank you for joining. We have really appreciated the fact that you've taken 45 minutes out of your day to come and join us. We hope you've found at least one nugget that you can take back to the office today and have a think about. But in the meantime, you know where we are. Look out for that email with the recording on it, and we're here to support you through this time as well. If anyone wants to have a deeper dive into the employee engagement research that we touched upon today, then we've got another webinar next Thursday, and you can go to the WorkBuzz website, which is workbuzz.com, and register on there, and we'll be going into a deeper dive and covering all sorts of things like equality, diversity and inclusion, all the way through to touching on hybrid working as well. So thank you again. Thanks Steve, thanks Neil, you were fabulous. Excuse my driving, it was my first time, so I will get better and I will go on a driving course before the next one.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, everybody.